much. Today we're going to learn about the factors that led to the scramble for Africa. So this is a broad unit, but again it's a broad lesson, but I've narrowed down to this subtopic. Now the topic is European invasion of Africa and the process of colonization. And then we're going to study particularly the factors that led to the scramble and partition of Africa. So in the previous lessons, we learned about the methods that were used by Europeans to acquire colonies in Africa. We learned about trickery, use of military force, and all other forces possible that the Europeans used to colonize Africa. Now, aside from the military conquest, divide and rule, and every other factor that they used, today we are going to be specific. What are these factors? And the factors are in 4 factions. So we have the social, we have the political, we have the economical, and we have the strategic. Now I'll explain them one in one. I'll explain them in every bit. Why this topic? This topic is a part of paper 2 that in KCSE often falls in section B of history paper 2. So it is a must, it is a part that candidates who are geared towards the examination should be focused in. And we should when learning this topic today, we should be geared towards the specific details. Like for instance, what is partition? Partition is just this art of subdividing. Then scrambling, even at home, if you are very many siblings, you may be scrambling for food, you might be scrambling for power and everything. So there are various factors that made the Europeans to be scrambling for Africa. Run for me the PowerPoint. So these are the factors that led to the scramble. I've mentioned the political, social, economical, and strategic. So I'll start with the political. Yes. So you are going to be focused on the political reasons why the Europeans scrambled and partitioned Africa. Now, there is the unification of Germany. At the time when Otto von Bismarck was the Chancellor of Germany, the Germans had defeated the French in a war called the Franco-Prussian War. Now, unification of Germany happened in that after the Germans had defeated the French and had acquired Alaska and Lorraine provinces, and the various states of Germany had united into one, this steered the nationalism, the rate of nationalism, to hype up within the nation. So this political unification was very, very important of Germany. The next. So the next one is nationalism in Europe. So various various European countries were united in nationalism. How can I explain nationalism in Kenya to give you an instance? And what is nationalism? This is the state of being one in one accord with the country. A country united in one language, one accord, and national philosophy. So most countries of Europe, they were nationalized at this time, and most of them started fighting for their space. They wanted to have a space, at least outside Europe, to ensure that they exercise their power. Yes, the next slide. Run to the next slide. So we have militarism. By the late 19th century, when the scramble and partition of Africa was taking place in the Berlin Conference, so here there were officers that were frustrated. In Europe, generals are awarded their ranks according. Okay. There were the countries that were united. I was explaining militarism. Now, in militarism, in Europe, the generals have to be promoted when they get to war. So you have to fight for you to get a rank in the military. It is unlike our continent, Africa, whereby ranks may just be awarded because of various reasons, but there you have to go to war. Now the European soldiers especially the junior officers, those of the junior cadets. They wanted to go their countries to venture into Africa so that they could find a space where they could be proactive in war so that they could get and attain their ranks. So I'm through with the major 3 political reasons why the Europeans scrambled and partitioned for Africa. Now, I want us to go to the next, which is the social reasons. I really need the social reasons. Then I'll come back to the economic. Racialism. Now, the Europeans, they had a superior complex, yeah? They viewed Africans with inferiority complex. So they thought that by exercising their rule in Africa, they're going to exact the fact that the Aryan race is superior than the Negro and the Arab races that are predominantly African countries. Then the next one is the settlement of surplus population. And Britain is a master of art in this. If you look at the Great Britain, for instance, if you go to various continents apart from Africa, you go to the United States, where there were almost 50 states were part of the British colony. You go to Australia, you go to Canada, you go to places like Hong Kong. The British used to settle their surplus population in these countries. So to date, predominantly, if you go to such countries such as Australia and New Zealand, which were former colonies of Britain, you'll find that they are majorly, it's the English-speaking people that are there in these countries. So the same they wanted to do with Africa. We will study that. For instance, in the next lessons, you'll study about why Kenya was a settler economy. It was meant that the Europeans were to come to Kenya and they were to settle in Kenya just the way they do in South Africa and they did in Zimbabwe. So they wanted to settle their surplus population. Again, the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century had ensured that there was a not political, but population boom in the population of Europe. So almost all European countries, it was not only Britain, but the French, the Portuguese, all the Western countries that were involved in the Berlin Conference, they wanted to settle their excess population in Africa. Then we also have this one of the abolition of slave trade. Even though the slave trade had been abolished by the Britons in the late, the mid 18th and the late early 19th century, in Africa, there were still facets of slave trade that was still going on, particularly in places like East Africa, where the Arabs were still continuing with this slavery. So the Europeans, they wanted to stop slavery at this time. Then again, the missionary activities. If you read Jomo Kenyatta's book, Reconciling, the Reconciliation, or Mugidania in Kikuyu, you'll realize that our founding president says that when the white men came, they told us to close our eyes. As we were closing our eyes, no sooner had we said amen, when we opened our eyes, then our land was stolen. So when we opened our eyes, our land was stolen. Now, the missionaries were the blueprint to the colonial activities of the Europeans. So when their missionaries were coming, missionaries from their countries to various territories, for instance, Ludwig of Germany, when he went to Tanganyika, and Dr. Livingstone, when he came he traveled to Nigeria and other parts, and Sir Johnson, who came to Imperial British East Africa, that is Kenya, you'll find that this blueprint is what their motherland followed. So people like the British, they used to send their colonial administrators to the places where their missionaries had heavy activity. Now let me go back to the economic reasons, and I'll explain them one by one. In the economic, there is trade. Why trade? Now the European traders were also following the trails of the missionaries. Now when they came to Africa, and they found that Africa was vast with untapped resources like minerals, and then other things, they wanted protection from their mother countries. So the best thing to do was that their mother countries, had the desire to control the trade in East Africa, not East Africa, but Africa. This led to the scramble and partition of Africa. Then mineral wealth. The continent with a vast amount of mineral wealth is Africa. For instance, the mineral that is used to manufacture atomic bombs, such as uranium, is only found in places like Democratic Republic of Congo and South Africa. Then 40% of the world's gold is mined from Witwatersrand region in South Africa. So the mineral deposits in Africa are so much and so much are still untapped. And when the colonialists when the Europeans saw that Africa was rich in mineral deposits, they wanted to exploit the mineral wealth of Africa. Again, the investment in surplus capital. The Industrial Revolution had ensured that Europe had boomed with regards to capital. So it was just only ways that they invest this capital elsewhere in another continent. They also believe that by investing in their capital in Africa, they will generate more wealth, just the way that they generated more wealth in their previous colonies in places like the New Worlds, like America, Australia, New Zealand, India, and all those colonies. Then again, the search for raw materials for their industry. With the Industrial and Scientific Revolution peaking at the 19th century, it was only necessary that what was going to be there is that they were going to find the raw materials for their industry. For instance, if you look at Kenya as a colony, when it was a British protectorate, we were very, very vast with raw materials such as sisal, coffee, tea, and even minerals like soda ash. Now, if you look at the blueprint of the colonial power in Kenya, even the Uganda Railway, as it was constructed, it led the colonialists to the areas of various raw materials. So for instance, if you look at even the cities of Kenya, they're developed, the big four cities in Kenya, that developed along the railway line, is because from these areas, the British could obtain raw materials such as coffee, tea, sisal, and the various ones. So the search for raw materials was again a very, very important one. When you look at Belgium, it was so strategic with Congo, such that they used to tap rubber from the rubber tree. Yes, because Congo is the only country in Africa which produces such material. Other raw materials, industrial raw materials that are also vast in Africa included rubber, I've mentioned that, cotton, cocoa, and tobacco. And the last one in the economic reasons was search for markets. Now, the Industrial Revolution again had ensured that Europe had a lot of raw materials. It had a lot of products. But again, as Industrial Revolution was taking place in Europe, it meant that almost all European countries, they were developed at almost a united rate, meaning there was competition for markets for their goods. So it was only natural that they come to a place like Africa to search for market for some of their industrial goods. Now, I'll go to the last one, which is very, very important, the strategic reason. Now, if you're a candidate, you should be very, very serious with this point, because here we are very, very particular. What is a strategy? Whenever a coach wants to go to the field with his players, he has to devise a strategy for him to win a match. Same to military. They have to devise a strategy for them to ensure that they defeat their opponents. Without a strategy, you are as well as lost. But again, these are the following strategic reasons. So we have to mention this. Not all parts of Africa were productive for the Europeans, but some were strategic than others. Why? I will explain in a few, starting with the first point, the Egyptian question. Now, the French, with their engineers, especially Ferdinand de Lesseps, they had carved out the canal called Suez Canal. Now, Suez Canal was an entry both to Europe, and it was also the gateway into the Middle East and Far East. Now, it connected two major seas, the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. The implication was that any power that was going to colonize Egypt was the power that was going to control this important sea route. Now, the French, they owed it all. It all belonged to them, because it is the engineers, Ferdinand de Lesseps, who constructed this Suez Canal. But the British saw its significance. Now, the Suez Canal was also the sea route to India. In Form 1, you remember we taught you about how important India is to Europe because of spices. And that led to the Portuguese to come down up to the East African coast for them to find. Now, the Suez Canal was a shortcut. Now, it is because of the Egyptian question that and Suez Canal that inspired the Britons to ensure that they had colonized this country, so that every ship, they could monitor every ship that passed through the canal. Now, with this agreement with the Egyptian, meant that they had to sign an agreement. At that time, Egypt was under the Ottoman Empire. So when they signed an agreement with the then king of Egypt, the king requested them to protect Egypt's only source of livelihood. That takes us to the second point. You can see in the slide there, the source of River Nile. Now, the source of River Nile, because the Nile is like the umbilical cord of Egypt. Without Nile, Egypt will die. So the Nile has been strategic to Egypt ever since the ancient time to the present date. Now, since it was very, very important for Egypt, for them to ensure that the Nile was maintained, so Egypt, the British signed an agreement with them to protect, secure all the sources of River Nile. If I were to draw for you the map of Africa, I'm not a refined at it nowadays. If you look at the various countries which Britain colonized, you'll find that it started with Egypt, then the vast Sudan territory, Uganda, then Kenya, such. So I'll give it a go, something sort of. Something like this. So yes. So very fast, this can be our Lake Victoria for a demo. Then this is River Nile. This is the White Nile, then this is the Blue Nile. Of course, Ethiopia was not colonized. Now, if you look at this territory, our key here, every map has to have a key. So in our key here, this is the territory that British territory. Okay. So after this agreement with Egypt about protecting the source of River Nile, the British embarked on a mission to ensure that it traced the source of River Nile. And not only the source, it had to protect the sources of River Nile. That is what brings them to Imperial British East Africa, which is Kenya, by default. So from here, if I divide this country, this is Egypt. If I divide this is Sudan, then Uganda and Kenya. All these were British territories, yes? Then this is our sketch for Kenya. Let me give it a go that way. So it implies all these countries that, because of the source of River Nile, when John Speke came and he discovered that Lake Victoria was one of the sources, important sources of Lake Victoria, he ensured that the British signed treaties with the Bagandas and every other territory that lived alongside Lake Victoria. Why a part of like Kenya, which has a smaller, vast amount of, not a vast amount of Lake Victoria? Because most of the rivers that fill Lake Victoria, which is an contributory to the River Nile, is because most of the rivers that drain its waters there are from the Kenyan territory. So by default, this source of Nile ensured that these people colonized that part. Even important countries like French and the Germans, they were also interested in colonizing Uganda. But that, I'll save it for the next lesson. I'll tell you why the British are the people who succeeded in colonizing Uganda, but that is in the next unit. Again, it is not only the Egyptian question, but also the Moroccan question. If you look at the map of Morocco, Morocco is almost touching Spain, yeah? If this is Europe, I'm trying to sketch Europe. There is a Strait of Gibraltar in Morocco. So this part was also strategic because all the ships that go through from the Atlantic Ocean into the Mediterranean pass through this strait. So this is why the French were very, very interested in colonizing Morocco. Let me give the French an X. Yes, I put it here in the key. These are the French territories. Now this is just an aspect of strategic reason. Yes? Then again, the Congo River. Why the Congo River? Now, in Africa, I think Congo rivers, there are a lot of rivers that are tributary to the Congo River. Let me explain the Congo River. Most of the rivers in Africa are innavigable, meaning they have falls, they're occasioned with falls, and they're very rough, such that you cannot sail ships in them. So there are very, very few navigable rivers. The only two rivers that are most navigable in Africa are rivers Niger and River Congo. So River Congo became a very important part of the strategic reasons why the Europeans colonized Africa. Why? It was of strategic importance to all the European powers that colonized the central part of Africa. For instance, which European countries colonized the central parts of Africa? We have the Belgium, which were predominant in the Democratic Republic of Congo by then. We have the French, which were in the Congo-Brazzaville. We have Portuguese, which were in Angola. Now we also have the French again in the parts of Rwanda and Burundi, which were part of Central Africa by that time. Now all these European powers wanted to secure Congo. Why? Congo was navigable. So from the Atlantic Ocean, their ships could carry all the merchandise, like the products like rubber, timber, and everything that they planted in, yes, and all that. It could also transport their military, and it could also transport their missionaries. So Congo River became very, very strategic. It was so strategic such that the French and the Portuguese clashed over the Congo. If you look at the map of the DRC and the map of Angola, the DRC has a very, very small coastline. Why? It is just found in the mouth of River Congo, because the Portuguese also wanted a share of Congo River. Now, every European countries found that the Congo Basin was very, very strategic for them as part of their investment in Africa. The next one is the Congo River, the North African coast. The North African coast I've explained when I was using the Morocco for as an example. For instance, to control the Mediterranean, the Strait of Gibraltar, which is the border of Spain and Morocco, and a small part of the Mediterranean was very, very strategic. Why? Any European colony that controlled this part here of Gibraltar and this territory could supervise each other's activity in the Sea of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, just as Suez Canal is important, if I were to extend my map, allow me to extend my map so that you see how important the Suez Canal is. So if I were to draw the other parts of Asia, it would be something like this. Then India, all parts of, but that is not important for today. My Saudi Arabia is very, very wide. So let me make it something sort of. So inside here is the Red Sea. Then this is Mediterranean. So the Suez Canal is something that just goes here. So just as the Suez Canal was important to the British, that is why the North African coast was also important to any power that colonized that part. So this is Africa, and this is Europe. There is another point that I want to come to, and that is West Africa. West Africa. So with West Africa, the French lost Egypt. When the French had lost Egypt, it came at a time when Otto von Bismarck was also became more of a diplomat. So he had encouraged the French initially that they should go to get colonies in Africa as a compensation for the territories that they had lost in Alaska and Lorraine. That is the in between French and German. So the Franco-Prussian War had meant that they had lost two of their vast mineral, the iron-rich mineral states. So to compensate this, they were to, Otto von Bismarck encouraged them to go for colonies. Again, Otto von Bismarck told them they were to replenish their population that were lost during that war by colonizing Africa. So when the French had lost Egypt, they went berserk on West Africa. Now from West Africa, they not only established colonial posts, but they established protectorates. As early as the late 19th century, they already established a port at Porto Novo, places like Dakar in Senegal, places like Guinea, places like Togo, places like Benin. No, Togo was German. So places like Niger, Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, and all vast French territories in West Africa. To date, if you look at the composition of the French football national teams, for those who like football, you'll find that their team is composed of various black players of black descent from various, you can even trace their various nationalities. It is because of this, and in fact, it also influenced their policy of administration. So for instance, the French chose assimilation as a policy so that they could assimilate those that they had conquered or colonized in West Africa. So in that regard, they went ahead to colonize West Africa. So almost all the parts of West Africa were colonized by Britain, except for countries like Ghana, which was colonized by British. Also Togo, initially colonized by the Germans. Then Cameroon was initially colonized by the Germans, but after World War II, the French replaced the Germans there when Germany was punished because it had to surrender some of their colonies. You can even find that The British, when the Germans left Tanganyika after the end of World War II in 1945, the British joined, quickly secured Tanganyika. Why? Because it also has the vast amount of Lake Victoria, so to protect river, the source of River Nile. But again, the French, they prefer to take countries in West Africa like Togo and Cameroon. Now, with all this is all I have to say as a summary of this lesson. Africa is rich, we are still vast, we are still unexploited, and you can't blame anybody for this scramble and partition of Africa. I had a debate on the activities of King Leopold II of Belgium and a debate of the activities of Adolf Hitler later. Yes? Which one of them was an assassin? King Leopold II had a lot of activities in the Congo that were dehumanizing, when people were maimed of their hands because they could not meet their ration of rubber and gold and minerals that they were supposed to acquire from the colonies. Again, you cannot blame the Africans for being silent. Number one, they were not part and parcel of this partition that took place in Berlin. Most of their leaders were duped into signing these treaties with these Europeans in a trickery manner. So you cannot blame the Africans for not reacting at first. Yes? Because the whole scramble and partitioning of Africa happened in Europe, where they were not involved. Not even one African leader was there to represent Africa. Now, later in the next class, we will learn about the various reactions of the Africans. Now, the strategic reasons, political, social, and economic reasons, all of them are now past us. We've learned about the various reasons why these Europeans were very, very strategic with Africa. Now, in the next lesson, you'll learn about the reactions of the Africans. The Africans were not just going to sit and watch their lands. So that will take us to our next lesson. Thank you very much.